Life ate me up. Life ate me up. I couldn't do what I wanted to do. That's what hurt me.
A little bit of genius. Then he got to miss a man that was totally in control of the ball.
I mean, he could hit a golf ball as pure and as straight and as clean as anything I've ever seen.
He woke up every day and knew he was going to hit it well. He just knew he was going to hit it well. Every day. It's frightening, how straight he hits it.
Never offline. This swing can't hit crooked.
It's like iron by iron. Ball doesn't move.
There isn't many people on this planet that could pick up a golf club and start hitting balls and have us stop and walk over and watch him hit them.
Golf is happiness. It's intoxication without the hangover. It's stimulation without the pills. Price is high, death rewards are richer. Some say it's a boy's pastime, the other pills men. It cleanses the mind, rejuvenates the body. There's these things and many more for those of us who know and love it. Golf is truly happiness.
Watch this. No way!
I often tell people there are thousands of stories about Moe, and some of them are even true. So, you know, yeah, and in the book that I wrote about my friendship with him over the years, and all of the sort of work I did around him and about him, I try to include stories only that I had seen personally, that I had, so I could obviously vouch for them, or that I knew people who I trusted and who spoke about encounters or anecdotes that they had about him, which I could verify as from just trusting those people. But there are many, many stories I wouldn't include just because if everybody had seen Moe, for example, walk up to a par 4 and ask what kind of hole this is, and somebody said a driver wedge, and he took out a wedge and hit that first, and then a driver on the green. I mean, he may have done that, but, based on all of the people who say they saw him did it, they saw him do it thousands of times and thousands of courses. It's kind of like everybody who saw Gene Sarazen's Harwood shot that he holed out to win the Masters. If they were all there, there'd be more people going to Masters now than there are now. So, I was lucky to get to know him since I was a kid, and therefore I could write the book based, almost entirely on my own experiences.
When did you first meet him, Lorne?
I was about 13 years old, and I grew up
really?
a couple of within a mile of a practice facility and a golf course called de Havilland, which was near an old sort of air base, not too far from where I live right now. It's I could walk there. It's a mile and a half away. It's no longer an air base, but anyway, there was this. There was a 2-tiered driving range. There was the 9-hole golf course, a really, pretty good golf course. It was about 3,600 yards tips back then. And there was a gigantic practice putting green. And the best part for me as a kid was there was an 18-hole night lit par 3 course. And as I say, it was within a mile of where I grew up. And I would go there with my dad and my uncle. We'd play in the evenings. And that's where I first saw Moe. I walked in one evening on a kind of a hot July night, and there he was hitting golf balls, and he, dressed in a turtleneck and pants that were only, down to his ankles, not really well fitted, and just sweating from head to toe and whacking one ball out there dead straight, one after another, after another. People gathering around him, and I asked my dad, who was that? And he told me that's Moe Norman, and that was the beginning of it when I was about 13 years old. I made sure that I followed him as much as I could. And then when I took up to writing, of course, it just continued, wrote about him, film about him for CBC here in Canada, and ended up doing this book many years later. So, we had a very good friendship, that's for sure, over the years. And he was a tremendous subject for a writer. Still the most interesting person I've met in golf, and I've met them all, obviously,
really?
At least in my generation.
Wow. Yeah, that is a... that is a kind of ringing endorsement, isn't it? I mean, what was your first interaction with him as that being that young kind of teenager, Lorne, and going up and watching him hit golf balls? Were you just sort of watching kind of quietly by? Was he quite interactive? Did he sort of get you involved? When did you first sort of have a conversation, and how did that sort of play out?
Well, I think my first sort of interaction with him, or it wouldn't even be a conversation, but interaction, was one of the things he did at the Haviland, at this golf center, was he would sort of work behind the counter, and he would dispense a pail, of golf balls to you. You pay whatever it was, $1.50. I don't know, way back then in the '60s, and he would sell you the golf balls. That was part of his job there. And you really couldn't call it a job. His job was really just to hit golf balls and entertain people there. But that's what he did. That would be my first, you might say, hey, Mo, can I have some golf balls here? How much are they? Or my dad would pay, who knows. Yeah. And then I would just sit and be mesmerized and watch him hit golf balls. And because of his mannerisms and the way he dressed, and no matter how hot it was, I mean, Toronto can get hot in July. It could have been 90 degrees at night. And he'd be dressed in the same clothes and sweating from head to toe in that turtleneck and just hitting golf balls one after the other. And the driving range, you might remember know that the way golf balls came to you, they sort of came out of some kind of a chute, and they came right down onto a rubber tee. So you didn't even have to bend down to put a ball on a tee. You just say that was perfect for Mo, because he was so fast. He would just stand there, one after another off there. Off into the darkening sky and then into the night sky. He loved hitting golf balls, and people would gather around him, and a certain amount of them would laugh at him because he did it so differently, with his style. Maybe you've tried to swing like Mo. I played recently with a guy in Florida who tried to swing like Mo, and he was a pro. He's a pro. He's a teacher pro down there, and I'm going to be Mo today, he said. And I've done that myself. I introduced Mo at clinic, tried to play 9 holes swinging like him. But some people who weren't too sympathetic, you might say, or compassionate, would laugh at him. And my dad, I remember, told me, my dad had played some pro football in Canada, in the Canadian Football League, and he was really into sports. And he was a very understanding and compassionate guy, my father was. And he told me when I was very young that Mo was probably the most unusual golfer out there at the time, that he ran into problems on the PGA Tour, or what was, the precursor to the PGA Tour, and people did laugh at him, and that it would be much better to try to understand him than to laugh at him. So in a lot of ways, I think what my dad said to me about Mo became the cornerstone of how I approached the game as a writer. I was a decent player. I could play amateur tournaments and junior tournaments. I knew how difficult the game was, and that's why, I guess, when I started to write about it, from 2 points of view, I would never say that this person choked on a golf shot, because I might say they didn't get a very good shot given the circumstances, or they couldn't, whatever the pressure got to them, who knows. But it also came from Mo, because I would not diminish that person because of his or her inability to hit the shot at the right time. And Mo was a guy who required a lot of understanding and compassion, and I think that's probably why he trusted me as I went along and became a writer, and we spent all that time together over the many years until he died in 2004. So it really did become a cornerstone of how I approached writing about golf.
Was Mo quite an easy person to befriend so much? You guys were close, you knew each other for many decades. So what was he a difficult person to get to know and strike up a relationship with, or was he sort of a bit of a fairly open book? How would you describe him?
Excuse me, he could be difficult for sure. I mean, if you looked at him the wrong way, or you might say hello to him and he might not even respond. It just depends, really. For me, I was lucky because, as I say, I met him when I was 13 years old, and he was always very, very friendly with kids. He loved to introduce kids to the game. He'd go over to that gigantic putting green and to Haviland and just be hitting putts and helping kids with their putts. He'd give away golf clubs and give away golf balls. He was a very, very generous person. So I think because I got to know him when I was so young, and he was still relatively young, in his 30s, I guess, I didn't have much of a problem in terms of establishing a connection with him. But I saw over the years that people did have difficulty, especially if they kind of made a comment about him that he might have overheard that he didn't like, he didn't appreciate. Or there were times when he would just brush somebody off, even if they were being nice to him, because he redefined the word introvert. He was very, very introvert. As I often say, he was a very, very private person playing a public game. And that's why it was difficult for him at the higher levels of the game. He won everything in Canada except the Canadian Open. But he didn't feel really comfortable, with the real stars of the day, you might say. Arnold Palmer. He came up at a time with Arnold Palmer, of course, and Palmer was just setting the golf world, alight with his electricity and the way he played and his smile. And Moe just felt a lot of people just laughed at him, and he didn't feel all that comfortable. So it's not surprising that he didn't do all that well in the United States when he went down and played it on the tour. He just had a tough time of it. He couldn't really cope with the public demands of the game. But privately, if you could have made a living just hitting golf balls all your life and giving exhibitions like a musician can, let's say, who doesn't want to go and do concerts, but just work in the recording studio. Like in the book, I write a lot about Glenn Gould, the Canadian pianist, who was, very, very private, and he gave up concerts, and he played Carnegie Hall. He played everywhere. He was brilliant. But he gave up the concert hall for the recording studio. You can't do that in golf. Maybe some players can just go around giving exhibitions, but very few can. You got to go out there and play in tournaments, put yourself out there, and that was difficult for Moe to do in front of so many people. He was, he would always get to the tee at the last second. If he had a 9:42 tee time, he'd show up at 9:41 and 38 seconds or something, because he didn't want to be out there standing on the tee. I caddied in tournaments when he was in the same group, and you could see that he was he took time to get to his ball, and then he hit it quickly. He never looked at a putt, just stood up and hit the putt. Didn't read it. It's if he was forced to do aim point or something like that, I think he'd have a breakdown and he'd have to leave.
How much of that do you think was a sort of product of his upbringing, Lorne? I guess a fair bit has been written about Moe's character, and I understand he was one of, was it 5 children? And there's a story of him maybe going tobogganing with one of his older brothers, I think, or perhaps it was a friend of his, and having an accident after which his mum apparently said that he kind of wasn't the same child, really. He had a sort of a kind of particular attention span and get quite obsessed about certain things, which you kind of narrated there in a sense. He with golf, at least, he took it up later on from what I understand, and just got quite sort of obsessive and immersed in the skill. Perhaps you could just sort of tell us a little bit about that period of his life.
That tobogganing accident you referred to, that did happen. He was just coming down the side of a hill, and there was a car coming around the corner, and the car brushed him. It didn't run him over or do anything like that, but it did, it did sort of strike him at the side of the head. The wheel did. And his mother, always kind of regretted she didn't take him to the hospital because the damage didn't look extensive or anything. But his teacher at the time, I think it was kindergarten, and noticed that he started speaking quickly and double speaking. That might be the origin of there. So, there might have been some kind of, I talked to a neurologist about that when I was doing the book, and there may have been some kind of minimal brain damage that caused him to speak so quickly, really, and just fed into him and that's why he was attracted to golf. Of course, we often say that people who play golf can be loners, and it was, at least he could do that on his own. He was also an excellent baseball player. He could, kind of hit the ball wherever he wanted to, a singles hitter, not home runs. He didn't hit the baseball over the fence or anything, but he could control it and hit the, pick his spots, that sort of a thing. So, and did his personality come, from his whole life? To some degree, yes, because his, he didn't get a tremendous amount of support for his golf. His family, they were kind of I guess you would say, a lower middle class home. They didn't lack for anything, but they certainly weren't wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. And when his father in particular heard that he was caddying at a local club, a private golf club, his father didn't understand that world, know that world. And so Moe eventually got a few golf clubs and started hitting balls. And he told me that they would hide his golf clubs under the front porch at the house. So, there wasn't a lot of support there. Eventually it was there, but not when he was a kid. And that probably, it all just sort of fed into the way that he approached the game and the way he handled life. I think the fact that he was so private and so different actually led directly into how he swung the golf club, right? If you think about it, I mean, he would not have played so quickly if he didn't want to get out of the public eye. So when he's playing so quickly, it means he played golf more as what we all try to do, as a reaction sport. He saw his target and he swung. He didn't stand there and take three practice swings and try to visualize. He just walked up. I played with him once, and I tell this, one of the times I played with him, I tell the story in the book where we stand up on a short par 4 at the golf club that I play at now, actually, Maple Downs in Toronto. And they were very good to him there way back when. And it was kind of a blind tee shot. And he said, where do I hit it? Where do I hit it? Couldn't see a landing area. And I said to him, just hit it over that ridge. And the fairway begins over the ridge. I said, aim at that cloud. And he said, can't aim at the cloud, can't aim at the cloud. Clouds move. So he was a bit lost there on the tee and didn't know where to hit it, really. So he was not a fan of blind golf shots, really. He needed a target to react to, and then boom, he was so fast. And if you averted your eyes to look at somebody in the crowd or wherever, you could miss his shot. I mean, he was the fastest player I've ever seen.
Did he ever talk much, Lorne, about how he learned to swing the club? Because obviously he swung the club in a completely unique way. He approached the game, I sense, as a bit of a, you might say it's a bit of a loner. He was sort of, an introvert. He was self-taught. He didn't have any infrastructure around him in terms of how he was learning to swing the club, certainly from what I gather at a pretty young age. Did he ever talk to you about these were the people that he looked up to, or did he look at certain positions, or did he read anything, or did he just purely go on instinct and feedback from the face and where the ball flew? How did he end up with the swing that he had, which was obviously incredibly effective, but pretty unique, right. I think.
Well, there was a man in Kitchener, Ontario, where he grew up, a very good teaching professional, pro at the club, where he grew up with the public golf course Rockaway. And the man's name was Lloyd Tucker, and he taught some of the top amateur golfers of the time, became pros. Well, Gary Cowan, of course, won the U.S. Amateur twice, and the Canadian Amateur he won it as well. Lloyd was Gary's teacher. He taught another excellent young pro named Jerry Castlering, and he helped Moe. I mean, he did help Moe a little bit, but the way in which he helped him was to do a little work on his grip and then not to change his swing at all. For whatever reason, Moe very, very quickly put the club well behind the ball, because he knew that everybody talks about taking the club back low and slow and extending your arc, developing a wider arc, and he's something in him, although I'm not even sure that he can put it into words later on. Yes, but he just felt, well, if you want to take the club back low and slow, why don't I start at 14, 16 inches or whatever behind the ball already? It's already that far back, right? If you want to have balance in your golf swing, you want to be solid on your feet, why not have a very wide stance? If you want to have a big arc, maybe hit the ball a little further, and remember, he was hitting with using persimmon and balata in those days, well, take a wide stance, and then you're solid on your, and George Neepson, of course, advocated a wider stance as well. And, I think Moe had a lot of respect for George Neepson, and also one of his best friends and confidants was the guy named Nick Westlock, who won 4 Canadian amateurs, ended up playing in the Masters 4 times. Back in those days, Augusta, the Masters gave Canadian amateur champions an exemption, which is why Moe played a couple times. But Moe did have his people that he followed, and he knew a lot more about the golf swing than he would let on. He would look at pictures and study them, but he didn't really use campers or anything like that in those days. He just felt, he sort of thought it all out in an instinctive, artistic, very ingenious way, and that's why he never changed really his whole life. He just didn't. He wanted to take his hands out of the swing as much as possible. So he had these big rubber grips made by a rubber tire company in Detroit, and they were made kind of specially for him. And his golf clubs were very, very heavy. Back in the days of swing weight, they were, whatever they were, D1 or something like that, or E1. And I've held them. And he would show up at the Canadian Open on Tuesday at Canadian Open week. And you've heard this story where he would kind of skip over the rope, come out there in his street shoes, and the players would start exhorting him to hit golf balls. Nick Price, Paul Azinger, Fred Couples, and eventually, oh no, I'm just through street shoes, can't hit balls, don't ever help clubs, don't. Finally, he would grab a club, let's say Paul Azinger's, and how can you hit this? How can you hit this? The shaft is like a matchstick. It's like a matchstick. I want an oak tree. He wanted a heavy club, something that he could really feel and control. And but eventually he started hitting it fine and street shoes. The Canadian Open, that was one of the highlights of the week for a lot of players. Seeing Moe, you would skip over that little rope there and get out in the range and start hitting golf balls.
Yeah, it's amazing just watching his swing now. I mean, we're fortunate that there's quite a few clips of it out on YouTube. And I think I was watching a clinic that he'd given just in preparation for this conversation with you, Lorna. He started giving clinics, didn't he, later on in his career? I think there was an arrangement with Titleist, and I'm not sure how much of what he sort of talks about in those clinics is what he was thinking at the time or how much he figured out for himself. But yeah, there's some brilliant snippets there. I mean, there's so many quotes that I guess we'll come on to in the course of this discussion, but one of which that he talks about when he's swinging the clubs, like vertical drop and horizontal tug, and it's the feeling of greatness, rashers of bacon rather than pork chops when he's talking about taking nice shallow divots. And he strikes me as someone who did think about, clearly he loved hitting a lot of golf balls in quick succession, but he strikes me as someone who was quite a thinker about the golf swing as well, maybe in a similar way to Hogan. He obviously didn't write about it, and there's not as much documentary evidence as there is with Ben Hogan's thoughts on the golf swing, but Moe certainly had some kind of beliefs as to how to deliver the club effectively and what he was really feeling.
Oh, he did. He was so enamored of striking the golf ball purely, of hitting it in the middle of the face. I mean, you looked at the faces of some clubs from top players, and the size of a dime or a quarter, a penny, and that's how Moe's was. Just wore out the center of the club face. But that vertical drop you're talking about, he would talk about that a lot if anybody asked, or he would show it to you. It looks like the club is so far behind you, and the way it then drops down and he's coming through. He talked about having some of the things he said, like you want a golf swing without any rotation. Well, there was rotation there because his body is turning through the ball, but it's not what he felt. He just felt it was the golf club and it was his hands. They were connected and the golf ball stuck to that face of that club. To him, in his mind and the way he felt, he was sensitive to this, that the club went so far down the line, he felt the ball was just sticking on the face of the club. And he loved that feeling, really. I mean, he did. And a lot of that was achieved by that vertical drop that you talk about. Pretty hard to do. I mean, I don't know if anybody can do that unless you hit 800 balls a day. But, Bradley Hughes teaches, we talked about that before in my Knutson podcast. He talked about that, what he calls the 430 position coming into impact. And Moe got into that 430 position, and that's why he could strike the ball. I mean, he just didn't miss shots. He really didn't. Until he got older. And then I was playing with him once at the golf club in Brantford, Ontario, which is kind of in the area that he grew up in nearby. And they were good to him there, and they let him play there. And he hit a ball. He drove the ball kind of onto an opposite fairway, coming down the back nine. There were some young guys playing down that fairway, and they laughed at him. I said, "Moe, we thought you never hit a ball offline." And that really put him off. He said, "Haven't played all winter. I can't miss a shot." And that sort of a thing. So, you had to be careful with what his feelings could be hurt pretty quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that, I don't know if we're jumping into it a little bit early, but it's something we absolutely have to talk about in this conversation, because the stories of, you mentioned Tiger saying that Moe Norman and Ben Hogan are the only two people he considers to have ever owned their swings. I mean, some of the anecdotal tales of Moe Norman's prowess as a striker of golf ball just seem absolutely absurd. I mean, and I think it would be remiss if we didn't tuck into a few of them. One of which I heard, I think it was Moe when he was playing with maybe Sam Snead or Ben Hogan, some top professional golfers, and they came to a hole with a creek running across it, and I think the other members of his group took out 3 woods or irons to lay up short of it. He pulled out a driver, and they said, "Well, what are you doing? That's going to go in the burn." And he said, "I'm going to hit this over the bridge." I mean, I guess you must have heard iterations of that story in one form or another, in your time researching and spending time with Moe Norman. Can you speak to the sort of the veracity of that anecdote in particular?
Well, that story I can't. I mean, I've heard it. It's one of those stories that thousands of people will tell it because they've heard it. Did it happen? I can see it happening. Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, but I can tell you just two examples from the many that I saw that I can vouch for, because I saw them. I was there. One, I grew up, when I was a good young player, a junior player and a young amateur, there was a tournament at the club I grew up at in Toronto called Uplands, but the tournament was called the Eager Beaver. It was essentially the amateur tournament, an 18-hole tournament on a weekend that started out the Ontario amateur tournament season. And Moe would always come there and put on a little clinic before. The first hole was a short par 4, but they were hydro wires down about 40, 50 yards down the fairway. And Moe would put on a clinic, and first of all, he would put on the clinic by elevation. He'd say, okay, what do you want? First floor, second floor, third floor, fourth floor. And he would take the club, call it a 9-iron, hit it to that height. He'd hit it down, whoa, first floor, second floor, third floor. But the story that I found amazing, but I saw it, was with these hydro wires. There was a local rule that it was kind of a 2-iron wedge hole. There was a creek down there, and you had to lay up in front of it. Yeah. The local rule was if your tee shot hit the hydro wire, you could re-tee it, do it over. Well, Moe would try to hit the hydro wires intentionally. But you know how thin a hydro wire is. It's like a fingernail, right? And he'd hit it, let's say he had 10 balls, he'd hit that hydro wire 2 or 3 times. That's intentionally. I'm not saying he hit it every time, which would be, superhuman. So that's one story. Another one at Royal Oak.
That is absolutely insane, isn't it?
It is insane. Another
reminds
one
me when you're like young and you're like on the driving range trying to hit like telegraph pylons that we have here in the UK at like a few driving range, and you might do one, in 4 or 5 hours.
He's hitting the hydro wire intentionally. People couldn't believe it. It's mind blowing. Another one was at the Royal Oak Club, as it was called, which was, of course, that the Canadian PGA owned in Florida, in central Florida. And Moe that's kind of near where he lived in the wintertime. He would drive down his Cadillac. Two things I always want, leather shoes on a Cadillac, leather shoes on a Cadillac. That's alligator shoes. I'm sorry, alligator shoes. That's what he wanted. It wouldn't be too, too popular right now, really. But he wanted alligator shoes in the Cadillac. Anyway, at Royal Oak, I was up there one day, and about 220 yards down the fairway, he was hitting balls. 220 yards or so down the fairway, there were 2 women who were crossing the fairway. I don't know why they were crossing the fairway, because there were no houses on either side, but there were houses in the community further away. Maybe they were taking a shortcut, so they were crossing the fairway. They were maybe 5 yards apart, and Moe was just hitting balls. He didn't even notice them. He barely picked up his head, hit one shot after another. But at some point I said, Moe, hang on, wait till those women cross. You might hit them. And he just looked at me. He said, oh, no, I won't hit them. I won't hit them. And something in his brain was able to calculate the speed at which those women were walking, the distance they were for each other, and how far he could hit his forward, whether it would fly to 210 yards or one bounce, what would happen, right? Anyway, he said, oh, I won't hit him. Anyway, he hit this forward, and it just went right between them. So as they were walking, and they were moving, they weren't standing still. So he was like, Lionel Messi trying to make a pass or something, to somebody coming up on the side and anticipating where that player would be. And that was what Moe was doing with these women. Figured where they would be. Something, the calculations he was making in his brain, were...
It's godlike. It's godlike control.
Yeah. But I saw him do it. And so those are stories I can vouch for, and many more like that. Really, it was astonishing. That's why I call him the most interesting person I've met in golf.
I mean, referring back to the previous guest or previous subject matter, I guess, your conversation with Sam a few weeks ago, George Knudsen. I did hear a story that George Knudsen and Moe Norman would go out, and when they played together, they would have a friendly wager or a bet on how many flags each of them were going to hit when they went and played 9 holes. Which I think I might have mentioned that to you a few years ago, Sam. I'd just say jokingly to you, should we have a bet in the spirit of Moe Norman and George Newson how many flags we're going to hit, when in reality it'd be more realistic if we bet on how many greens we might be able to find in 9 holes. But is there any truth to that tale as well? I guess they spent quite a lot of time together and played a fair bit of golf, and obviously, both great characters in their own right. But did you ever hear of that tale?
Yeah, I heard those stories. I mean, I was never in the same group with George and with Moe, so I didn't see them do that. But I could see them doing it, because they were so into just hitting the ball accurately and hitting it spot on. I would doubt that they played for money. Really, Moe wasn't the guy who played for money, and neither was George. They would just be taking the pure pleasure from the shot, hitting it accurately and one-upping one another that way. But yeah, I could see that happening. I mean, Moe just loved to take the mickey out of people and hit it closer than they did, really. Whoever they were, Nick Westlaw, George Newson, didn't matter. I mean, he enjoyed hitting accurate golf shots. And, he hit them 800 times a day. His hands were like sandpaper. When he shook your hand, or his way of greeting you might be to pinch your cheek, and you felt like your cheek was going to tear apart because he didn't know the strength of his own grip.
Wow.
Incredible stuff. And obviously, I mean, you mentioned earlier there, Bruce, that quote from Tiger, which I think that's on the cover of your book that you did, isn't it? Lorne, the Moe and Mooch is right. I mean, it's an unbelievable endorsement. To just talk to us about his professional playing career and how some of that went, because as you said, he was hugely successful in Canada. Didn't really want to do a huge amount of travel. This would have been in the days as well where, PGA circuit maybe wasn't as big, or maybe, I don't know if it's unfair to say it wasn't as big a draw perhaps then, and it might have been actually just quite a nice choice to stay and play a bit more golf in Canada. I don't know if there's any truth in that. But then,
Moe played his golf in Canada because, he's number one, it was expensive to go to the U.S. Number two, he wasn't that interested. But then, he did play the winter circuit, as they called it back then, and played some tournaments in Florida and on the PGA Tour. If you look at old Golf World magazines, you can see his name in the standings there. And a lot of people think that Moe finished fourth. That was his highest finish in a tournament in New Orleans Open. But I found the issue of that magazine with the scores, and Moe didn't finish fourth. He finished down the line somewhere. So, he struggled a little bit down there, more with the public side of the game and with the tour players kind of laughing at him. And he wasn't comfortable. But, in Canada, he won everything across Canada. The provincial opens, pretty much won most of them. He won Canadian PGA championships. He won, I think, 7 or 8 Canadian senior PGA championships in a row. So in Canada, he was comfortable, and as he got older, he would give clinics and stand up in front of people and talk. A lot of times, if you heard those talks, it would be the same talk. It was something that he'd memorized, and it was kind of almost by rote, really. So it's not, like he was that comfortable, but he did get more at ease, in crowds and with people. But the golf course was where he was certainly the most comfortable and where he wanted to be. But, he was quite happy just sticking around. He didn't have big ambitions to go down to the U.S. and play the PGA Tour. Nothing like that. His personality just wouldn't allow him to do that, to be comfortable, and eventually, of course, that's why he left the tour, because, he was a bit of an entertainer. He would get, he would have a tee that was 8 inches high and hit it off that tee, where he hit balls off Coke bottles, kind of the more, golf was a pretty conservative game back then. I think if Moe were playing now on the tour, if Moe Norman of 60 had come out and be 35 years old now, he'd be a lot more accepted, because in society in general, we accept differences more easily. And Moe would have been more accepted and welcomed, and I think, this is great, people would say. We've got a very interesting guy here right now. He would have won the PIP, the Player Impact Program.
Yeah, he would have won it. You would love him, wouldn't they? I mean, you'd love watching the guy, wouldn't you? Because, for one reason, it'd just be such a breath of fresh air to see someone pull a stick and commit to the shot within seconds of getting to the ball. I'd love to see a lot more players do that, Lorne.
Putting him and Patrick Cantley in a group might be that would be great watching, wouldn't it?
I think Moe would blow his top with Cantley,
the Ontario Golf Association, Moe was playing so fast, the Ontario Golf Association here asked him to zigzag across the fairway but he wouldn't get to his ball so.
I mean,
You
there's,
know.
you mentioned there, Lord, earlier that he didn't sort of fit in that well with the PGA Tour, and I guess his introverted nature wasn't a great fit, and perhaps also the kind of the playful entertainer in him as well didn't jarred with the conservative attitudes in the game that were prevailing during the 60s. There's a story of him going to, I think it's New Orleans in particular. There's a tournament there where he had a bit of a dressing down from some of his fellow players or officials on the PGA Tour after one of the rounds there. I think they sort of said, all the strange outfits and the fast play and the strange demeanour, that he needed to take himself more seriously because he was giving off a bad image for the game as a whole. Is there much truth to that? Was there one moment in particular that in your mind was the reason why he moved back to Canada and didn't really want to engage with the PGA Tour too much, or was it more of just it was just a general way of thinking that it can't be attributed to one particular event?
Well, there were a few players back then who kind of laughed at him, made him feel uncomfortable, and one day he just sort of left the tour and he showed up at a friend's place in Florida. And the guy said, his buddy said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I don't want to play at the PGA Tour anymore. I don't like it there. I don't want to be there." And it was kind of a cumulative series of events that happened, and that was pretty much the end of the PGA Tour for him. You got to remember, this is a guy. When he got into Augusta, after winning the Canadian Amateur, he went down there, and he didn't bring a caddy. Those days they used Masters caddies. But he didn't have he went out there to have a practice round, and he was carrying his own bag at Augusta. Mm-hmm. And Clifford Roberts got wind of that and came out in a cart and said to Moe, "What are you doing? Why are you out here without a caddy?" "I haven't got the money. I haven't got the money for a caddy." And Clifford Roberts said, "We'll take care of that. We'll figure something out, but you can't be out here without a caddy." There are stories from sleeping in sand traps and sleeping at the side of the road, and those are all true. It's amazing, really, that he did as well as he did, giving the sort of you might say psychological handicaps or limitations that he had playing a game like golf. It would have been better if you were a chess player and you could just sit in a room and play chess or snooker or something like that. But to play in front of thousands of people, but he was a great playing companion, really. At the Canadian Open one year, I think might have been 1963. There was a time that Doug Ford won. Moe was in contention coming down the last few holes, and he ended up just three-putting so frequently. But at one point, Doug Ford, who, as I say, went on to win the tournament, hit a tee shot off into the woods, and the crowd who were supporting Moe, the Canadians, they applauded Doug Ford's shot into the trees, and Moe gave them a dressing down. He said, "No, you don't do that. That's not golf. You don't applaud a bad shot. Let him go hit his golf ball and leave him alone." He was a gentleman, really. And, but if he was hurt, you may never hear from him again in terms of playing that tournament or talking to you. I know that happened frequently. It's a friend of mine. There's a kind of a hamburger joint in Toronto that Moe would go to a lot to have a burger, and my friend spoke to Moe, fairly often. He had a good relationship with him. He was a good golfer too. I need to see him there at the restaurant. It was called the Golden Star. I think it's still there. And Moe would show up there, and my friend Neil would show up there. But they would talk, and then a couple of weeks later, when they were there, it was like Moe had never met him. Just looked at him like blankly, like as if he never met him. So I don't know what was going on there, but that's just the way he could be. But that was okay. He was so unusual. We overuse the word unique, but he was unique. I guess everybody is, but he was unique in ways that you might have trouble grasping.
It's a really interesting perspective, that is, though, Lorne, because I think a lot of people, perhaps when they read about Moe Norman and hear these stories of how just frighteningly good he was at golf, how accurate he could be, just how much complete control he had over his golf ball. It's a shame. I think a lot of people would see it as a shame that he didn't achieve more in the game, that he didn't play the PGA Tour. He could have won majors, and they think it is sort of a shame that he didn't make more of his talent. But actually, the way you've framed it there, it's the other way around, and it's like he made so much of it and achieved so much in spite of the challenges that he had in his life, and that he didn't have a temperament or necessarily the mindset to cope with so many variables that are intrinsic in the nature of professional golf. There's so many distractions in this game, I guess, to play it at a high level, and the fact that he was able to win so much in Canada, just stands on its own two feet as a wonderful achievement. And yeah, we should be making more of his achievements rather than thinking, it's a shame he didn't achieve more.
Well, my take on that has always been that, people would often say to me, as you've just said, that, it's too bad Mo couldn't handle other sides of the game because he could have won everything. Lee Trevino said something like that. He said, if Moe Norman could have, kind of handled other aspects of the game, he would have won everything in the game, really. Trevino said, I remember a parking lot at Glen Abbey here during the Canadian Open. But my contention is that if Mo were a different person psychologically, he would have been a different golfer. Because he wouldn't have had I think they, as I said before, they'd both played into one another. So if somehow, let's say he had gone and had a sports psychologist or whatever, and tried to change his personality and encourage him or help him cope with some of the psychological demands of the game or the social demands, as you say so accurately, so rightly, I think he would have been a different golfer. And I think, if people were prone to listening to everybody about his golf swing, he would have been a different golfer. If he were around today with this golf swing and with people telling so much information out there, trap man, this, that, instruction that, launch angle, spin rate, smash factors, so on and so forth. And if he were trying to achieve certain positions in his golf swing, I think he would have failed. I really think, I think the fact is that he was just a one-off who came into a game that allowed one-offs, really. And, there aren't necessarily, and it's an individual game, so he could play it. But could he have won a lot more if he were different? I'm not sure he could. I put that sort of notion in the same class as people would often say to me, if Mo would have taken time putting and studied some putts and lined them up and so on and read them, he would have made more putts. More. I say, no. Like, Mo made as many putts by not looking at the line and not thinking about it and just trusting what he saw as he walked up to the ball as he missed, maybe by not looking at the line, If he missed the 4-footer, well, of course he missed it. He didn't look at it from the other side of the hole or whatever, right? Well, I'd say, well, how about those 20-footers he made last 4 holes or whatever, right? Where he just walked up and hit it just as fast, really. So I don't buy that. You can't have one without the other, let's say.
That sort of trigger-happy, sort of obsessive nature was almost a sort of a blessing and
I
a
think
curse,
he has to be accepted. He has to be accepted as just a one-off.
That's the full package.
That's the full package. That's right. Just as, you're going to look at all walks of life, musicians, artists, actors, and he was a genius in his own way. Would he have won more tournaments if he weren't the Moe Norman we know? I don't really think so. I think he won what he could given who he was.
I'm curious, how much of this do you think was nature versus nurture, Lorne? How much of it was he born with some sort of just God-given talent for ball striking? Or
I think it was the whole package.
Nature get him there, like just repeating it.
There's something about his nature, and somehow he just, felt good with a golf club in his hand. It gave him something to do to be himself, really. He could give him some confidence as opposed to maybe feeling a little bit different from others because of the double speaking and other things like that, So golf was the perfect game, the perfect vehicle for him to express himself, Golf is, as I've written before, golf is a game that gives loners freedom of expression. And, Mo could express himself through golf. He couldn't, he liked other sports like baseball and was good at it, as I said, but I don't know that he would have been so good. Let's say he was the same level baseball player or hockey player as he was golfer. I'm not sure he could have succeeded that well in a team format. That would have been tough for him. So it was, wonderful that golf was available as a means of expression for him. But, I think nurture did play a little bit to do with it, in the sense that he wasn't nurtured. His golf game wasn't really nurtured. He found a way for him to be a young boy and to play sports on his own, but without really a lot of encouragement, you might say. And so was he nurtured? I mean, you could say that nurtured the individual in him, because he just said, I've unconsciously or subconsciously, if I'm going to get along in this life, I really do have to be an individual. I'm not saying he phrased it like that at 6 years old or something like that, but some instinct in him kept him moving in that direction and led him to golf.
Yeah, I mean, it's the stories of him just hitting balls for hours and upon hours. I mean, is it a silly question to ask? Did he have much in his life away from golf? Did you get the impression that there was much else that filled his time? And I'm conscious he didn't really have much in the way of any long-standing relationships or romantic interests. And I guess the stories of him living in a motel and having the same change of clothes, or like his whole wardrobe on the back seat of his car. I mean, was there much, outside of golf in Moe's life?
It was the few friends he trusted, who helped look after him, and wherever he lived, the motel room or small apartment, or sometimes his car. Yeah. He would drive around Southern Ontario and just stop on the side of the road and listen to motivational tapes. His car was full of motivational tapes, self-help tapes. Yeah, he would do that a lot. I drove with him. I mean, one time I was in Calgary with him, and he wanted to show me some of the places, a place where he won the Canadian Amateur, the golf course. Wanted to show me a golf club there that he was very comfortable at because the members treated him nice. And we just drove around. And we did that in Ontario, Southern Ontario sometimes too. I can picture in my mind right now stopping on the side of a dirt road in the country, and he was driving down his big Cadillac, got out of his car, took out some motivational tapes, showed them to me on top of his car. He had some golf. He did have some golf, a book by Paul Bertholli, who was a teacher in North Carolina. The Bertholli Method he wrote, very interesting guy. Mo always had that book and claimed it was, one of his Bibles, and he would stop by when he drove north to Canada from Florida in the winter and stop by and see Paul Bertholli, Irv Schloss, another guy. He had his routines. He was a man of routine. He drove down Florida the same route all the way. He drove slowly because he didn't want to get a ticket, although he got a ticket once for driving too slowly on the interstate. So he just had his own way, and you couldn't disturb that way. And if you did, well, you were sort of cast adrift, you might say. But but he was a warm-hearted guy. As he got older, and there were social situations, when he was inducted into the Canadian Golf Hall of Fame, it was the same year Jack Nicklaus was inducted into the Canadian Golf Hall of Fame, and he was in a crowded room. Again, dressed like, as I recall, in like a yellow sports jacket for this cocktail hour. And he wasn't much of a drinker. He would drink Cokes and then Diet Cokes and nothing else. I mean, the sugar and all the Cokes. That's why his teeth were so like snaggle teeth. They were so sharp at the bottom. But at this particular cocktail party, I mean, it was crowded, as I say. It was a hot day there. And at some point, I heard my wife kind of yelp, you might say, something like this, whoo, like that. What was that? I looked at her, and Moe Norman had come up to her, behind her, with a ice cold glass of Coke in his hand, and said, "Oh, I heard you're Lorne's wife. I heard you're Lorne's wife. Just want to say hello. And his way of saying hello was to put that ice cold glass up the back of her neck. And that's why she reacted like that.
Just superb. So funny.
He really was. I get the sense he was a bit of a prankster. Like he wouldn't mind.
Oh yeah, I know.
Poking fun at people. You mentioned he's quite a sensitive soul, but this clinic that I referred to earlier that I've been watching on YouTube, but I urge anyone listening to the podcast go and check it out because it's just full of some comedy gold, probably more than anything else. I think he's hitting balls in like green trousers and like this crazy multicolored check shirt, and he's just hitting shots, and he talks about the vertical drop and the technical stuff. But he also talks about after he hits each shot, he's like, "Oh, pure as the driven snow." Most people are never going to feel that ever in their life. It's a shame that no one ever has this feeling. It's the feeling of greatness.
The feeling, yeah. I mean, he would at clinics, he would stand there and then inevitably he'd say, open fear. That's how people see when they hit the golf ball. Open fear. Not me. I see happiness. The ball fits the Moe Norman way. The ball fits the Moe Norman way. Fairways are wide. The ball is small.
It's superb though, and the thing is, when you watch those clinics, that's the really strange thing. Is obviously you talk about him being a shy and introverted person, but then he comes across as really garrulous. Just you touched on the Hall of Fame stuff there, Lorne. The other thing, of course, was the sponsorship deal that he picked up towards the end of his career as well. I get the sense that he hit the sort of, when he got towards the end of his playing career, all of a sudden there was just like this sudden appreciation for him as a character, his ability and what he could do. And it was just maybe a late fuse. And he all of a sudden got a lot of recognition quite late on with was it Wally Uline with the sponsorship contract with a Kushner, and there was another deal as well, wasn't there? It was a Natural Motion or something like that. There was all of a sudden there was quite a few things that came at Moe a little bit later. Is that fair to say? Which must have felt a bit strange when he was a bit of an outcast for a few years.
But Wally Uline of Titleist always appreciated that Moe played Titleist. It's not like he was on staff or anything. And then sometime at the PGA Merchandise Show there, and he started. Titleist started paying Moe $5,000 a month for the rest of his life, just because he was Moe Norman and he supported the Titleist, and he felt it was the right thing to do. I remember, for the purpose of my book, I sat down with Wally, arranged a meeting with him let us have some small room at Augusta in the clubhouse, and we talked. But anyway, he did. And then there was Natural Golf with Jack Kirkendall. That lasted a while as well. And the other thing that happened, the Canadian PGA organized clinics for Moe across the country, and he would travel. They paid him something like $800 a clinic, and so he got more comfortable doing that. He did. He got more comfortable, as I say, in kind of a rote, mechanized way. But it worked out for him. And really, the last 10 years of his life, he felt surrounded by a lot of respect and a lot of love, I think.
Conscious of the Tiger quote that we mentioned earlier on, and it's on the cover of your book there, Lorne. Where do you think Tiger's appreciation for Moe Norman came from? Because I guess Tiger was growing up and playing golf sort of in America, and maybe not as aware of Moe Norman as a brilliant talent and how many Canadian titles that he'd won. Having spoken with Tiger, do you kind of get the sense of where his admiration and respect for Moe Norman? Because to put literally Moe Norman and Ben Hogan in a class of their own when it comes to having control of the golf ball is obviously quite an accolade, particularly coming from arguably the greatest golfer of all time in Tiger.
Yeah, well, Tiger studied the golf swing, as very young age. He was really into it. He was, you describe yourself as a swing nerd. Well, so Tiger.
Recovering.
Yeah. Anyway, but he knew who could hit the golf ball. He knew who could control the golf ball, and that's what he wanted to do. And he would actually study film of Moe, really. He told me to go to a find film of Moe just so he could study him and look at him. Really? So he became very aware of him. And then once at the Canadian Open, Dick Zocco, who was one Canadian player, won on the PGA Tour a couple of times, he saw that Moe was on the putting green. Moe wasn't playing. He was just hanging out the putting green, and Tiger happened to be on the green at the same time. And he introduced them to one another. Tiger came over, shook Moe's hand, and there's a photo of that. Somebody took a photo. So, yeah, I mean, Tiger was well aware of Moe, just as I'm sure he's aware of. There's people out there that haven't even heard of. Tiger, who can't handle the social side of the game, but Tiger, man, I can that guy swing that golf club. And he's interested in that. And so he was well aware of Moe when he was very young, quite young.
Wow.
I've got, I suppose, it's, for people to find out a little bit more about Moe Norman, which is really, I suppose these podcasts, these player profiles, of which you've done our first two, Lorne, and what a hot start it is to have you helping us bring two brilliant characters to life. Where can people go to find a little bit more out about Moe? I suspect your book would be a good starting place, but
My
Are there
book
any
would be a
other
good place to start. Tim O'Connor's book, The Feeling of Greatness, which is a more conventional biography of Moe, would be good. There's a film we did, if people can ever get a hold of it, is from a series on CBC called Life and Times, which was an hour-long documentary about Moe, where he gave us really good access. There's also some shorter clips. There's a show called The Fifth Estate, which was filmed. It's about a 10-minute piece about Moe, if you look for that. Torino was quoted in there, and so that's a nice little insight into him. So, the usual conventional ways. You can dig up articles if you want to go really down the rabbit hole. Get onto your local library site, find newspapers, and just see where Moe won his tournaments. And, there are a lot of articles out there about Moe over the years, really. So, it's not like there's a lot of video of tournaments or anything that he played in back then, although you can find some of the Canadian Open here and there. I would look for those.
Yeah, sure. And are there any other sort of, I suppose, parting wisdom, Lorne, or any other sort of really fond memories that stick in your mind from Moe, and things and experiences, or anything else that really sort of just brings him to life a little bit more for us?
Just the way that people who knew him really well, including, his brother, who I got to know a little bit when I was doing the book, Nick Westlock, they had a deep caring and affection for Moe. And people should know that Moe was held in high esteem and was, really respected, because he made a life for himself that was difficult, really. And it could have been difficult, let's say, because he was so different. But he managed to do it. And I think that should give people hope, really, that if you're a little bit different, if you're a little bit unusual, there's something to be said. His most favorite song, as you may well know, was Frank Sinatra's My Way, right? And, I think that's kind of a beacon of light for all of us, really, to go our own way, to do it in a quiet way. Moe was a quiet guy, really, and he was very sensitive. And just to, as my dad told me back then when I was 13 years old, to try and step if you can in other people's shoes. Have some compassion. We need a little bit of compassion in this crazy world we're living in here. And I think, whether it's athletics or whatever, I think it always helps to open yourself up to others. And I think, and try to understand it from their point of view. And, that Moe, I think, if there's one lesson from him, it's that. And I remember in his weeding days, in his last few years, he was getting sick, and he was getting weak, and he was losing weight. He had, kind of congested heart failure. But he would always just be the same. He got very quiet and very soft. He'd meet Nick Westlaw at a local club. They'd have some breakfast, and he would just say, I had a good life. I had a good life. Everybody's got to go. Everybody's got to go sometime. He knew what was coming, and he was able to accept that, his fate, you might say. And he lived with a lot of, what would you say? There was a certain elegance to the way he lived, really. He focused on one thing, and that's all he did, really. And I was very lucky to get to know him, and really, he was a tremendous. I played with him, and he encouraged me, laughed at me sometimes, some of the shots I hit, but he was a tremendous companion on the golf course, and he wanted to see you enjoy it as much as he did. He and George Goodison, they were like two of a kind, one of a piece, you might say. They just wanted the people to enjoy their golf, even if it was just one shot around.
Beautiful, Lorne.
Amazing.
I think that's unless Bruce, I think that's a wonderful way to close it. I mean, it just brilliantly, brought to life there, Lorne. Honestly, thank you so much for doing that with us. I mean, it's fascinating hearing so much more from someone who knows him firsthand as well, which, I think that's the key thing with this stuff, is those first-hand stories, really. So, huge thank you. I mean, it's just brilliant.
Well, thank you guys for being open-minded enough to, George Newt and Moe Norman to invite me to talk to you guys. It was very enjoyable.
Thanks so much for your time, Lorne.
Watch this.